Everyone at Franklin Middle knew the rule. Stay away from the kid who never spoke. He sat alone, scribbling symbols no one understood, staring at the floor like he was listening to footsteps nobody else could hear. So the bullies decided he was easy prey. They knocked over his lunch tray, took his sketchbook, ripped the pages, and the boy didn't even look up. What they didn't know was that someone else saw everything. A man leaning against the fence across the street, broad shoulders, prison tattoos, eyes cold with the kind of calm only ex-cons carry. He had promised he'd never go back to that life, but when the boy brushed dust off his hoodie and whispered, "They took the last thing my mom left me," the man's jaw clenched. And the next morning, the bullies found out the hard way. They had just messed with the only person the ex-con would still kill to protect. Stay with me until the end, because what he does next to protect that boy will leave every bully and teacher speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Marcus Thompson had been watching Franklin Middle School from across Maple Street for exactly 17 days. Not because he was some creep hanging around kids. Not because he had nothing better to do with his time since getting out of Millbrook Correctional. He watched because his parole officer had assigned him community service at the rec center next door. And every morning at 8:15, he saw the same thing that made his blood run cold. A scrawny kid with dark hair getting tormented by 3 boys who looked like they'd been held back twice. The kind of boys Marcus recognized from his own childhood. The kind who turned pain into power because someone bigger had done it to them first. Marcus knew he should mind his own business. Rule number 1 of staying out of prison was staying out of other people's problems. But something about this kid reminded him of someone he used to know. Someone who used to draw strange pictures in the margins of math homework. Someone who died because Marcus hadn't been there when it mattered. The boy's name was Daniel Reeves, though Marcus only learned this 3 weeks later when everything went sideways. Daniel was 12 years old, lived with his grandmother since his mother passed 2 years ago, and had what the school called selective mutism. What that really meant was that Daniel had stopped talking to most people after watching cancer eat his mom alive, 1 chemo session at a time. The only time Daniel felt safe was when he was drawing. His mother had been an artist before she got sick, and she'd left him a leather sketchbook filled with her own drawings on the first half of the pages. Flowers that looked like they might bloom right off the paper. Birds that seemed ready to take flight. And on the very last page she'd drawn a single sentence in her careful handwriting. "Art makes the invisible visible. Keep drawing, baby. I'll always be watching." Daniel carried that book everywhere. During lunch, while other kids threw food and screamed about video games, Daniel would find a quiet corner and add to his mother's work. He drew the things he couldn't say out loud, the ache in his chest that felt like a black hole, the way his grandmother's hands shook when she thought he wasn't looking, the dreams where his mom came back and told him she was proud of the man he was becoming. But Tyler Hendricks, Brad Morrison, and Jake Sullivan didn't care about any of that. They only cared that Daniel was different, quiet, and had no friends to back him up when they decided to make his life miserable. It started small, like it always does, shoving him in the hallway between classes, knocking his books out of his hands when teachers weren't looking, calling him freak and mute boy, loud enough for everyone to hear but quiet enough to avoid getting caught. The teachers at Franklin Middle saw what was happening, but they did what adults always do when they're overwhelmed and underpaid. They convinced themselves it wasn't that serious. Boys being boys, kids working things out on their own. Besides, Daniel never complained, never asked for help, never even looked like he wanted them to intervene. What they didn't understand was that Daniel had learned early that asking for help only made things worse. When he was 8 and his mom first got diagnosed, he'd begged every adult he knew to fix it, make her better, make the cancer go away, make everything normal again. But adults just gave him sad smiles and empty promises. They told him his mom was fighting bravely, right up until the day she stopped fighting altogether. So Daniel stopped asking for things he knew weren't possible. Marcus watched this pattern play out for weeks. The same three boys, the same quiet kid, the same teachers walking past like they were all invisible. The day everything changed started like any other. Daniel sat at his usual lunch table, the one in the far corner where the fluorescent light flickered and cast strange shadows. He had his sketchbook open, working on a drawing of a massive oak tree with roots that stretched deep underground. His grandmother had told him that his mother was buried under a tree like that, and sometimes he liked to imagine her roots growing stronger every day. Tyler Hendricks approached first, flanked by his two followers like some middle school warlord. Tyler was the kind of kid who'd learned that being cruel was easier than being kind, that fear was simpler than friendship. "Hey, freak," Tyler said, sliding into the seat across from Daniel. "What you drawing today?" Daniel kept his eyes on his paper, his pencil moving in small, careful strokes. He'd learned that ignoring them sometimes made them go away faster, but not today. Brad Morrison reached across the table and grabbed the sketchbook before Daniel could react. "Holy crap, look at this weird stuff." Daniel's head snapped up for the first time, panic flashing in his dark eyes. He reached for the book, but Jake Sullivan caught his wrist and squeezed hard enough to leave marks. "Please," Daniel whispered. The first word anyone at school had heard him speak in months. "That's my mom's." Tyler's face lit up with the kind of cruel excitement that bullies get when they discover exactly how to hurt someone. "Your mom's? The one who's dead?" The cafeteria seemed to quiet around them, other kids sensing drama and turning to watch. Daniel's breathing got shallow and fast, the way it did during panic attacks. "Give it back," Daniel said, his voice barely audible. Instead, Tyler started flipping through the pages, holding the book just out of Daniel's reach. "Wow, your dead mom was a really bad artist. Look at these stupid flowers." That's when Marcus Thompson, who'd been eating a gas station sandwich and watching through the chain-link fence, saw red. Marcus had spent 8 years in Millbrook for aggravated assault. He'd put 3 men in the hospital for jumping his little brother outside a convenience store. The judge had called him a menace to society, a man who solved problems with his fists instead of his brain. The judge wasn't wrong, but watching Tyler Hendricks wave around that sketchbook like it was garbage, seeing the pure terror on Daniel's face, hearing that kid beg for the one thing that connected him to his dead mother, Marcus felt something snap inside his chest. He dropped his sandwich and started walking toward the school. Marcus had learned 2 things during his 8 years inside. First, violence always had consequences. Second, sometimes those consequences were worth it. He pushed through the school's front doors like he owned the place, his work boots echoing off the polished floors. The secretary at the front desk looked up from her computer, ready to ask for identification, but something in Marcus's eyes made her think twice. By the time he reached the cafeteria, Tyler had torn out 3 pages from Daniel's sketchbook. The delicate drawings his mother had created were crumpled on the floor like trash. Daniel was on his knees, trying to smooth out the wrinkled paper, tears streaming down his face in front of 50 other kids. Marcus stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Tyler was laughing, holding the sketchbook above his head, while Daniel jumped helplessly, trying to reach it. The lunch monitors were nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in the teacher's lounge like they always did when things got ugly. "Tyler Hendricks?" Marcus called out, his voice cutting through the cafeteria noise like a blade. Every head turned. Tyler's smile died on his face when he saw the 6'2" ex-con walking toward him with purpose. Brad and Jake immediately took 3 steps back, suddenly very interested in their shoes. "Who the hell are you?" Tyler tried to sound tough, but his voice cracked on the last word. Marcus didn't answer. He walked straight to Tyler, reached out, and plucked the sketchbook from his hands like he was picking an apple from a tree. Tyler was too shocked to resist. "This doesn't belong to you," Marcus said quietly, kneeling down to help Daniel gather the torn pages. His massive hands were surprisingly gentle as he smoothed out the crumpled drawings. Tyler found his voice again, the kind of false bravado that comes from having witnesses. "You can't just walk into our school, man. I'm calling security." Marcus stood up slowly, Daniel's sketchbook safely in his hands. When he looked at Tyler, his expression was perfectly calm, which somehow made it 10 times more terrifying than if he'd been angry. "You know what I did to the last kid who made someone cry over their dead mother?" Marcus asked conversationally. Tyler's face went white. The entire cafeteria had gone silent. 50 middle schoolers holding their breath. "I put him in the hospital for 3 months. Marcus continued in that same casual tone. "Broke his jaw in 2 places. Had to eat through a tube for 8 weeks. Lost 15 teeth." He took 1 step closer to Tyler, close enough that the boy could smell the cigarettes and motor oil on his clothes. "That was when I was 17 and stupid. Now I'm 28 and smart. You know what the smart thing to do is when someone hurts a kid?" Tyler shook his head, unable to speak. "Make sure they never hurt anyone again." Marcus turned away from Tyler like he was already forgotten, focusing his attention on Daniel. The boy was still on the floor, carefully trying to put his mother's torn drawings back in order. "Hey," Marcus said softly, crouching down again. "What's your name, little man?" Daniel looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Daniel." "I'm Marcus. These your mom's drawings?" Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. Marcus examined one of the torn pages, a watercolor of a butterfly with wings that seemed to shimmer even on paper. "She was talented, real talented. This is beautiful work." "She died," Daniel whispered. "I know, son. I can see how much she loved you in every line." Behind them, Tyler had found his courage again, probably because his friends were watching and his reputation was on the line. "Hey, prison boy, you can't just threaten students. I'm telling my dad, and he'll have you arrested." Marcus didn't even turn around. "Your dad know you steal from dead women?" "What?" "These drawings belong to Daniel's mom. She's dead. You stole from a dead woman and made her son cry about it. That's what you're gonna tell your daddy?" Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Around them, other kids started murmuring, and Marcus could hear the shift in their voices. Tyler wasn't looking like the tough guy anymore. He was looking like exactly what he was. A bully who picked on someone smaller and weaker over something that meant everything to them. "Matter of fact," Marcus said, finally standing up and facing Tyler again, "let's call your dad right now. I'd love to meet the man who raised a son that thinks it's okay to destroy a dead mother's artwork." He pulled out an old flip phone, the kind ex-cons carried because smartphones required credit checks and background investigations. "What's his number? We'll get him down here. Have a real conversation about respect." Tyler was backing away now, his 2 friends already halfway to the exit. "You're crazy, man. This is crazy. What's crazy is a 12-year-old boy having to beg for the only thing he has left of his mom while 50 other kids watch and do nothing," Marcus replied. "What's crazy is 3 big kids picking on 1 little kid because they think nobody's gonna stop them." He took another step toward Tyler, and this time the boy actually stumbled backward. "But here's the thing, Tyler. Somebody's gonna stop you. Every time you even look at Daniel wrong, I'm gonna know about it. Every time you make him feel bad about himself, every time you touch something that belongs to him, every time you make him remember that his mom isn't here to protect him anymore, I'm gonna be right there." Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent cafeteria. "And trust me, little man, you don't want me right there." Tyler turned and ran, literally ran out of the cafeteria, Brad and Jake scrambling after him like their pants were on fire. The spell broke. Kids started talking again, but quietly, glancing between Marcus and Daniel like they'd just witnessed something they didn't quite understand, but knew was important. Marcus knelt back down beside Daniel, who was still sitting on the floor surrounded by his mother's scattered artwork. "You okay?" Marcus asked. Daniel nodded, then shook his head, then started crying again. Not the loud, dramatic crying that kids did for attention, but the quiet, broken kind that came from somewhere deep and hurt. Marcus sat down on the floor next to him, not caring that his jeans were getting dirty, Or that every kid in the cafeteria was staring at the ex-con who just made their biggest bully run away scared. "Tell me about this one," he said, picking up a drawing of a garden in full bloom. And for the first time in 2 years, Daniel started to talk. Daniel started with the garden drawing, his voice shaky at first, but growing stronger as he described each flower his mother had painted. The roses that reminded him of her perfume, the sunflowers that always faced toward hope, the tiny forget-me-nots she'd hidden in the corners, because she said some beautiful things were meant to be discovered slowly. Marcus listened without interrupting, watching this broken kid piece himself back together one memory at a time. Around them, the cafeteria slowly returned to normal, but Marcus noticed something different. Kids kept glancing over, not with the cruel curiosity they'd shown before, but with something that looked almost like respect. When the bell rang, Daniel carefully gathered his mother's artwork and slipped it back into the leather cover. His hands weren't shaking anymore. "Marcus," he said quietly, "thank you. Don't thank me yet, little man. This isn't over." Daniel's face fell. "You mean they'll come back?" "Bullies always come back. But next time you won't be alone." That afternoon, Marcus made 3 phone calls. The first was to his parole officer, explaining why he'd left his assigned work area. The second was to his sister, asking her to research everything she could find about Franklin Middle School's administration. The third was to someone from his past that he'd hoped never to contact again. "Demon, it's Marcus." A gravelly laugh came through the phone. "Well, well, the Boy Scout finally needs something from the dark side. I need information on 3 kids. Tyler Hendricks, Brad Morrison, Jake Sullivan, middle schoolers at Franklin. What kind of information? The kind that makes bullies think twice. This gonna cost you, Marcus. You still owe me from that thing in Memphis. Name your price." By evening, Marcus had a complete dossier on all 3 boys. Tyler's dad was having an affair with his secretary and embezzling money from his construction company. Brad's mom was 3 months behind on their house payments and working 2 jobs to keep the lights on. Jake's older brother was dealing pills out of their garage while their parents pretended not to notice. Marcus didn't plan to use any of this information, but knowing it gave him power, and power was the only language bullies understood. The next morning, Daniel arrived at school to find Marcus waiting by the front entrance, not lurking or hiding, but standing right there in plain sight like he belonged. The secretary who'd been too scared to stop him yesterday came hurrying over with the principal. "Sir, you can't be on school property without permission," Principal Hartley said, trying to sound authoritative but mostly sounding nervous. Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "Actually, I can. Just got approved as a volunteer mentor through the Millbrook Re-Entry Program. All official and legal." Hartley examined the document, his face growing redder with each line. "This is highly irregular. We weren't notified of any new volunteers. Funny how paperwork gets processed faster when you know the right people," Marcus said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be helping with conflict resolution and peer mediation. Starting today." Daniel looked up at Marcus with something like wonder. "You're staying." "Told you this wasn't over, little man. I keep my promises." What Principal Hartley didn't know was that Marcus had spent every favor he'd earned during his 8 years inside to make this happen. Prison taught you that information was currency and connections were survival. Marcus had provided legal advice to fellow inmates, helped write appeal letters, and once talked a guard out of writing up a riot that would have added years to everyone's sentences. Now he was calling in every debt to protect one quiet kid with a dead mother and a sketchbook full of dreams. Tyler Hendricks arrived 20 minutes later with his 2 shadows, expecting to find Daniel alone and vulnerable as usual. Instead, he found the ex-con sitting at Daniel's lunch table, helping him organize his mother's drawings into protective plastic sleeves. "What the hell is he still doing here?" Tyler whispered to Brad, loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus looked up calmly. "Learning about art. Did you know that Daniel's mom studied at the State University? Won 3 awards for her watercolor technique." He held up one of the drawings, a landscape that seemed to shimmer with life. This particular piece uses a technique called wet-on-wet blending. Very advanced stuff. Tyler tried to summon his usual swagger, but something about Marcus's casual tone made it impossible. Nobody cares about his weird pictures. I care, said a voice from behind them. Everyone turned to see Ashley Chen, one of the popular 8th graders, approaching their table. She was followed by 2 of her friends, girls who normally wouldn't acknowledge Daniel's existence. My mom's an art teacher at the high school, Ashley continued, ignoring Tyler completely. She says this kind of work takes real talent. She sat down next to Daniel, examining the drawings with genuine interest. Did your mom really paint all these? Daniel nodded, still too surprised to speak. They're incredible. Like gallery quality incredible. More kids started drifting over. Not many, but enough to form a small crowd around Daniel's table. Marcus watched this unfold with quiet satisfaction, understanding something that Tyler didn't. Popularity was fragile, but respect was powerful. Tyler tried one more time to regain control. Come on, guys. It's just some dead lady's art. The words hung in the air like poison. Even Brad and Jake stepped away from Tyler, finally understanding that their friend had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Ashley Chen stood up slowly, her face hard with disgust. You know what, Tyler? You're gross. Like genuinely gross. She turned to Daniel. Would you mind if I took some pictures of these? My mom would love to see them. Really? Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Really? And maybe you could come to our art club sometime? We meet after school on Thursdays. As more kids gathered around Daniel's table, Tyler found himself increasingly isolated. His 2 remaining friends were edging away, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the sinking ship. The social order that had made Tyler powerful was shifting right in front of his eyes. Marcus stood up quietly and walked over to where Tyler stood alone, his face red with humiliation and rage. You feeling angry right now? Marcus asked, conversationally. Screw you, man. That's normal. Bullies always get angry when their victims stop being victims. But here's what you need to understand, Tyler. This is how it's going to be from now on. Marcus gestured toward Daniel's table, where kids were asking questions about different drawings, and Daniel was actually answering them. Every day, Daniel's going to have more friends. Every day, he's going to feel more confident. Every day, he's going to remember that he's not alone. Tyler's hands clenched into fists, but Marcus continued in that same calm tone. And every day, you're going to have a choice. You can be part of that, or you can be the kid who picks on someone over their dead mom. Guess which one makes you look like a man? The bell rang, and kids started heading to their first period classes. Ashley Chen helped Daniel pack up his drawings, chattering excitedly about art techniques and asking if he'd ever tried oil pastels. Tyler watched this transformation with growing panic. His entire identity was built on being feared, on having power over someone weaker. Without Daniel to torment, what was he? Marcus seemed to read his thoughts. You're thinking this is unfair, right? That I ruined your fun? Tyler didn't answer, but his face said everything. Let me tell you something about fun, kid. Real fun comes from building people up, not tearing them down. Real power comes from protecting people, not hurting them. Marcus started walking toward the exit, then paused and looked back at Tyler. Your choice now is whether you learn that the easy way or the hard way. But either way, you're going to learn it. That afternoon, Marcus found himself in Principal Hartley's office, fielding complaints from Tyler's father about intimidation and inappropriate conduct. Mr. Thompson? Hartley said, shuffling papers nervously. Mr. Hendricks is threatening to involve the police if you continue to, quote, terrorize his son. Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. Terrorize? I helped a kid organize his art project. Asked another kid to think about his choices. That's terrorism now? Mr. Hendricks says you threatened to put his son in the hospital. I shared a story about my past mistakes. Educational purposes. Isn't that what school's for? Hartley rubbed his temples. This is a delicate situation, Mr. Thompson. We appreciate your desire to help, but perhaps a different approach. Different how? Should I have let Tyler keep destroying Daniel's mother's artwork? Should I have watched a grieving kid get tortured and done nothing? The principal had no answer for that. Tell you what, Marcus continued. Let's make this real simple. Tyler leaves Daniel alone, I leave Tyler alone. Tyler starts problems, I solve problems. Fair trade. That sounds like a threat. That sounds like consequences. Something Tyler's never experienced before, judging by his behavior. Marcus stood up, straightening his jacket. I'm gonna keep showing up, Principal Hartley. I'm gonna keep protecting that boy. And I'm gonna keep teaching bullies that their actions matter. He headed for the door, then turned back one last time. Question is, are you gonna help me do it the right way? Or are you gonna wait until someone gets really hurt and wish you'd acted sooner? That evening, Daniel's grandmother Rosa invited Marcus in for dinner. She was a tiny woman with steel-gray hair and hands that shook from arthritis, but her eyes were sharp and knowing. Sit down, young man. Tell me why you're helping my grandson. Marcus accepted a plate of rice and beans, food that reminded him of his own grandmother's cooking. He reminds me of someone I used to know. Someone you lost? Someone I failed to protect. Rosa studied his face while he ate, taking in the faded prison tattoos and the careful way he held himself. You think protecting Daniel makes up for that? No, ma'am. Nothing makes up for that. But maybe it prevents it from happening again. And what happens when your parole is up? When you move on with your life? Marcus set down his fork, meeting her steady gaze. Daniel won't need protecting forever. He's stronger than he knows. He just needs time to figure that out. And if those boys come back, if they hurt him worse because you made them angry, then I'll handle it. Rosa nodded slowly. My Daniel, he hasn't talked this much since his mama died. Came home today telling me about art club and new friends. First time I've seen him smile in 2 years. She reached across the table and patted Marcus's scarred hand with her fragile one. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. That boy needs to remember he's worth protecting. But as Marcus walked home through the dark streets that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Tyler Hendricks wasn't the type to give up easily, and humiliation had a way of turning into something much more dangerous. Marcus had learned in prison that there were two kinds of men: those who learned from consequences and those who escalated until someone got seriously hurt. He had a sinking feeling that Tyler was the second kind. 3 days later, Marcus's instincts proved correct. Tyler had spent the weekend nursing his wounded pride and plotting revenge. The humiliation of running away in front of 50 kids ate at him like acid. His father had lectured him about handling his own problems after receiving Principal Hartley's call. His friends were avoiding him, suddenly finding excuses to sit at different lunch tables. But Tyler wasn't done, not by a long shot. Monday morning brought a new strategy. If he couldn't intimidate Daniel directly anymore, he'd find another way to hurt him. Tyler knew exactly where to hit hardest. During third period art class, while Daniel worked quietly on a charcoal drawing, Tyler slipped a note onto his desk. Just 4 words, scrawled in messy handwriting. Your mom was ugly. Daniel's pencil stopped moving. His hands started trembling as he read the note again, making sure he'd understood correctly. Around him, other students chatted about their projects, completely unaware that something inside Daniel was breaking all over again. He crumpled the note and shoved it in his pocket. But the damage was done. For the rest of class, he couldn't concentrate. Every line he drew reminded him of his mother's graceful strokes. Every shadow he shaded brought back memories of her gentle hands guiding his own. By lunch, Daniel was struggling to breathe normally. The panic attacks had been getting better since Marcus arrived. But Tyler's note brought everything rushing back. The hospital smell, the machines beeping, the way his mother's artwork had been packed away after the funeral like it didn't matter. Marcus found him in the bathroom, hyperventilating over a sink while cold water ran over his wrists. Hey, what's wrong? Marcus knelt down, his voice gentle but urgent. Daniel, look at me, what happened? With shaking hands, Daniel pulled the crumpled note from his pocket. Marcus read it once, then again, his expression growing darker with each word. Where did this come from? Tyler put it on my desk. He said my mom was ugly. Marcus felt that familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had landed him in prison 8 years ago. But this time was different. This time, he had something to lose. Your mom wasn't ugly, Daniel. Your mom was beautiful. I can see it in every picture she drew. But what if he's right? What if I just remember her wrong because I loved her? Marcus gripped Daniel's shoulders firmly. Listen to me, little man. That note? That's not about your mom. That's about Tyler being scared and angry and not knowing how to handle it like a man. He helped Daniel splash cold water on his face, watching the boy's breathing slowly return to normal. You know what we're going to do about this? Daniel shook his head. We're going to show Tyler exactly how beautiful your mom's art really is. That afternoon, Marcus made a call that surprised even himself. His sister Carmen worked at the local community college, and she owed him a favor from years ago when he'd covered her gambling debts to avoid kneecapping. Carmen, I need to use the art gallery space for one night, tomorrow evening. Marcus, that space is for student exhibitions and professional artists. I can't just, this is important. Life-changing important. What are you planning? A 12-year-old boy is going to show this whole town what real art looks like. Carmen sighed. You're going to get me fired. You're going to save a kid's life. The next evening, Daniel's mother's artwork hung in the community college gallery under professional lighting. Every piece she'd ever created was there, borrowed from Rosa's careful storage, displayed like the masterpieces they truly were. The opening drew more people than anyone expected. Teachers, students, parents, even some of Tyler's friends showed up out of curiosity. Tyler arrived with his father, both of them expecting to mock whatever pathetic display the weird kid had put together. Instead, they found themselves staring at work that belonged in museums, watercolors that seemed to breathe, sketches that captured more emotion in a few lines than most artists managed in entire paintings. Daniel stood next to Marcus in the center of it all, no longer the invisible boy who ate lunch alone. He was surrounded by people asking questions about techniques, about his mother's training, about whether he planned to continue her legacy. For the first time since she died, Daniel talked about his mom without crying. Tyler watched from across the room as his former victim became the center of attention, as adults praised artwork he'd called ugly just days before. The humiliation was complete and public, but more than that, Tyler finally understood what he'd been trying to destroy. Not just some weird kid's drawings, but a connection between a son and his dead mother that was stronger than any bully could break. Marcus found Tyler near the exit, looking lost and small among the crowd celebrating Daniel's triumph. Still think her art was ugly? Marcus asked quietly. Tyler shook his head, unable to speak. Good. Maybe now you can learn what real strength looks like. 6 months later, Daniel joined the high school art program early. Tyler transferred schools, but not before apologizing to Daniel in front of the same cafeteria where everything started. Marcus finished his parole and started a nonprofit helping at-risk kids find mentors. Sometimes the strongest protection isn't a fist or a threat. Sometimes it's helping someone remember they're worth protecting in the first place. That's the story of how an ex-con and a grieving boy taught an entire school that everyone deserves a protector. And sometimes the most broken people make the best guardians.